tonight, it's the first of the year. And the first of the year, I usually try to do a prophetic update. So we're going to be doing a part one of Will Jesus Return in 2015? And this part one is just basics. Now I've got some pretty interesting things that the Lord has shown me about things like the Shemitah and some of the things that are going on and how all this overlays. But we're going to start tonight with just the basics. So those that are familiar with this, this is probably review for you. But it's just sort of the way that I've looked at this thing and the way I'm going to do the evaluation this year and the prophetic update. So, will Jesus return in 2015? Well, surely the sovereign Lord does nothing without revealing His plan to His servants, the prophets. Amos 3:7. And of course, there we are, waiting for Him. So in 2015, the question is, will Jesus return? Will the rapture occur? Will the tribulation start? Will the U.S. economy collapse? Or will the zombie apocalypse come? So we're going to be looking at these things. Now I can already give you a hint on the zombie apocalypse. According to Zechariah 14, which is where this comes from, it looks to me like it happens after the return of Christ. But yes, it is biblical. It's in Zechariah 14, I believe, verses 12 and 13. So it's a plague that comes upon the earth. And I think you may have seen the movie with Brad Pitt, World War Z, which I guess stands for zombie. And there's all sorts of movies about this out there right now. And yes, there is a biblical reference for this. But I don't think we're going to have to worry about that in 2015. So we'll try to take that one off the table. But let's look at some of the rest of the things that are happening. First of all, our goal is going to be to present a picture of possible end-time events, timelines, and scenarios for 2015 and after. And we're going to be looking at Bible prophecy, prophetic words, the biblical feasts, because timing is often based upon them, biblical patterns, such as the Shemitah, current events, and of course, inspired speculation. Yes, I'm a teacher, but I'm not quite the Bible teacher that some do, because I'm not really afraid of inspired speculation. I'm here among a bunch of people who hear God, and so we're going to look and say, Lord, if you want to show us something, we want to hear it. So participation is encouraged. In part one, we're going to look at the basics. Should we know the day and the hour? Should we know the signs and the times? Why is it important to be on watch? What are the key events to the timeline of His return? And what do we watch for in the coming months? So like I said, this is a foundation, and then we'll get into some details as we go through a couple more lessons at least. So first of all, should we try and know the specific date and hour of Christ's return? What do you think? No, I don't think that works. But of that day, that hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father alone. So maybe He shared it with you, but He certainly has not shared it with the angels in heaven, nor Jesus. So I would think that they would get first priority on that. So no, I don't think we necessarily know the actual date or the hour. By the way, would it help to know the exact day of the hour? If you say, World War III is going to start, on Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I mean, whether it's 3 or 4 o'clock is probably not a big issue to you. I mean, when big events are happening, it's nice to know when they're coming, but the day and the hour is probably, if you're down to that, it's probably a little late for you to do much. So, however, should we be aware of the signs and times and be on watch? I believe that we should. In Matthew 24:33, Mark 13:29, and Luke 21:31, Jesus said, "Even so you too, when you see all these things, recognize that He is near, right at the door." So we are supposed to recognize when He is at the door. 1 Thessalonians 5:2-4. "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they're saying peace and safety, Then destruction will come upon them suddenly like birth pangs upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you like a thief.
Amen.
We're not supposed to be in darkness that this thing should overtake us. Mark 13, 35 through 37. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening, at midnight, the rooster crows, or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. Now this is in a parable. And maybe the master has gone off to a feast and he's coming back, but you don't know when he's coming back. But you better be ready when he shows up. So you should wait for him. And I think that's what he's saying here. Once again, he's talking about evening, midnight, rooster crows, or at dawn. We're not going to know the day or the hour. But we better be ready during that time. To be on watch, you want all the information you can get. Anybody that's a watchman, anyone who watches for anything that's happening, you want to know what's going on. If the bride is waiting for the groom to come, she wants all the information she can get. Has he left his house yet? I mean, whatever it is, you want information because it helps you when you're watching. It'll help you know what to watch for, what are the signs, and so on. So these things are important, so we're going to cover some of those things. So why is it important to be on watch? Any thoughts? Why do you want to watch? Yes?
So you can tell the people what's coming.
That's right. A watchman has to tell the people what's coming. Let's look at some things. Also, so what? You yourself can be ready. You must be ready. So why is it important to be ready? Well, let's read in Matthew 25. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like the 10 virgins. And what time is this? Matthew 25, what's he talking about? He's talking about the return.
Right.
At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like the 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish and 5 were wise. Now, the first thing to notice is that all of them had a lamp. So what do you think that significance is? You got to wonder, first of all, they're all waiting. They're all thinking they're ready, and they all have a lamp. So are these people saved? Are they not saved? They have a lamp. It goes on. The foolish ones took their lamps but did not take any oil with them. They were not able to keep their lamps lit. They didn't have a flow coming of the oil. Yeah, maybe they filled it once and they were able to light it, but maybe they didn't keep that flow going.
Yes.
So maybe they couldn't keep their lamps lit. That's the foolish. The wise, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's happening to a lot of people right now.
Yes, that's true.
And he's telling us that, no, we need to be on watch.
Yes.
At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom, come out to meet him." And the 10 virgins woke and they trimmed their lamps. The foolish ones said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." Yeah, it sounds like an easy solution, right? I mean, wouldn't you think that that would be the way? Okay, I got plenty of oil. They don't have any oil, so a good Christian should do what? Give them the oil, right? Does that work? You see, the Lord is setting up a situation to separate who truly, when the Son of Man comes, will He find?
Right.
So He's looking for the right people. Everybody thinks that God is out there trying to save everybody on the earth. He would like for everyone to be saved, but if He wanted everybody to be saved, He would just say, poof, and take you to heaven. He is looking for a bride who is waiting for Him. This whole 6,000 years of this period is looking to find a worthy bride for the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So all of these things that are happening are actually there, shall we say, sorting us out. And so there are 5 that were ready. And besides, I don't think you can give your oil necessarily. There's one place that oil comes from. It's the Holy Spirit that comes from Him. You can't really give that to somebody else. And anybody who's been through it knows that it takes time. I mean, anyone who's been through undergrad and graduate school in the Spirit, if you know what I mean, it takes time. So that's how you purchase the oil. So he says, no, they replied. There may not be enough for both of us. And you instead go to those who sell oil and buy some for yourself. But while they were on their way to buy some, the bridegroom arrived, and the virgins who were what? Ready. Went in with him to the wedding banquet, and what? The door was shut. Now all of these, they all had lamps. So you just got to wonder about this. Who are these people? Are we saying that there's people who are saved or think they're saved, but when He comes, something's going to happen? Could it be that the bride is actually not everybody? That certain people who are ready when He comes are a bride, and maybe the rest have to go through some more, but maybe yet they're still saved? I'm not sure. But I know there's a distinction here. I know they all had lamps, but being ready apparently is pretty important. Later on also, they came, "Sir, sir," they said, "open the door for us." But he replied, "I tell you the truth, I don't know you." This is a tough one. My sheep do what? They hear my voice. And what else? I know them. And they do what? So that's the people that he knows. Therefore do what? Keep watch. Because you don't know the day or the hour. But we can know the season. So being ready is important. And so therefore it is important to be watching and be ready for what's going on. So why is it important to be ready? Well, Revelation 19 says, "Let us rejoice and be glad and give Him glory. For the marriage of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready." So those that are ready get clothed in white linen. I see this as a judgment. When you read the actual Greek words down here, it talks about that righteousness has been declared upon them. It's a judgment has taken place, and they've been judged and declared righteous. And that's an important thing. We don't want to miss that. So what does it mean to be ready? Well, it says be dressed in readiness and keep your lamps lit, which seemed to be the problem that the other 5 couldn't do. And be like the men who are waiting for their master when he returns from the wedding feast, so that they may be able to immediately open the door to him when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds on alert when he comes. Truly I say to you, he'll gird himself up to serve, and have them recline at the table and come up and wait on them. Whether he comes in the second watch or in the third, or finds them, blessed are those. And to be sure of this, that if the head of the house had known what hour the thief was coming, he would have not allowed the house to be broken into. So you too should be ready, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. At an hour you don't expect. It doesn't say that we can't know the times and the seasons. So being ready is very, very important. Now, I could do a lot more about what it means to be ready, and I'm not going to go into that today. Right now, I'm sort of laying out a framework. But to be ready, I can basically say it's to be dressed in righteousness and have your full armor on. It can say, keep our lamps burning. Be expectant. There's a crown that awaits those who love His appearing. Be prepared. You've got to be ready for what's coming. Watch and pray, and be doing His work when He comes. So, we're, I believe, in a place to be ready. But we got to help each other.
Amen.
Now, we're going to go into a little bit more about this as we get into, are we going, but wait a minute, I thought we were going to be raptured and we don't have to worry about all that stuff. Well, we'll be talking about that. So, what's the key event to the timing of His return? What is it? Is there something that we can look at that says, hey, this is something we can know when He's going to return? So let's look at Matthew 24, the Olivet prophecy. And as Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to Him privately. He says, tell us, He said, when will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So He said, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. So what's happened here is Jesus is actually referencing something in the Bible. Not only does He call it the abomination of desolation, but He specifically points to a verse in Daniel. So I think that that would be a really, really good place to start if the Lord's going to share that. For then there will be great distress unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never will be equaled again. See, I've told you ahead of time. So the Lord's sharing this information with us, so I think it's important that we understand what He's sharing. See, we're not making a bunch of things up here. This is actually stuff in the Bible. The Lord wants us to know these things. I know the book of Daniel was sealed, but it says it's sealed up till when? And maybe this is that time. So Jesus is referencing this book. So when is that abomination of desolation, that key event that the Lord is referring to? And how do we know when that is coming? Well, we go back to the reference that Jesus mentioned in Daniel. It says, 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and anoint the most holy. Now, I don't know anybody who can do all of this, but except for the return of Christ. I mean, isn't that a pretty good description of the return of Christ? No one understand this. There it is again. Understand this, he says. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes, there'll be 7 sevens, 62 sevens. And it will be built with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. In the 62 sevens, the Anointed One will be cut off and have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city. The end will come like a flood, and wars will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. So there's a timing set apart here. We're showing 69 weeks of this period, and 1 week left. And he said after that, the Anointed One will be cut off. Well, who's the Anointed One? In this case, Jesus was cut off, wouldn't you say? Isn't He the one that will be anointed up here? To anoint the most holy. So there's apparently these 7 years that are out there. And that's what this is talking about. During this 7 years, it says He'll confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, He'll put an end to the sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of the temple, He'll set up the abomination that causes desolation. That's what Jesus was talking about. In the middle of this 7 years. Until the end is decreed. So we know there's a 7-year period in here. And in the middle of it is this big event. The abomination of desolation. So how long does this tribulation last? When he says it's in the middle, is the tribulation 7 years? Well, according to Daniel 12, he says, from the time the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there's going to be 1,290 days or 3.5 years. So that puts it right in the middle of the 7 years. Can you see the simple model? Like I said, this is a review for many of you, but this is a foundation of how we know what's happening. So I've just built a little model. And the model basically says that here's this 7-year peace treaty. And here's the seals that the Lord is opening. We don't know. They may have already started to open them. I don't know that. It doesn't say whether that has to wait till the 7-year treaty starts. I don't know. These things may already be happening. The Antichrist may be walking the earth. There may be wars happening on the earth. There may be famines. Death may be coming upon the world. These things could be actually happening now. Jesus calls these things birth pains. He doesn't call them judgment. He calls them birth pains. And I think Don just did an excellent job of describing that. the power of these contractions that hit. And everything, just the power of it all, and then all of a sudden there's a release. And the next one's stronger. And they come stronger and they come closer together as we approach. That these are birth pains that Jesus called this. And then apparently comes the tribulation, and we learned the tribulation was 3.5 years. Which seems to set it about the time from the abomination of desolation till the return of Christ. So the key to timing is about this to me. This thing that we can see right here is this 7-year treaty with Israel and many. So the question is, has that happened? Well, if you sort of look around at Israel, you'll probably figure that, no, I think we still got some things going on there. There was, however, a 7-year treaty with Israel that did meet these criteria. It started in 2007. It's called the Euromed Treaty. And it was a 7-year treaty. So you could look at that and say, you know what, this actually meets the criteria, but it wasn't the right one. It was just a thing between the EU and the Mediterranean nations. And it was a 7-year treaty because it turns out the EU has a 7-year budget cycle. So when they are doing treaties, a lot of their treaties, they're ending up paying people to do what they want them to do. That's the way they work in the European Union. So they have to budget these things. So therefore, a lot of these treaties are 7 years when the European Union's involved. So that's just a sample. So I believe that this is a possibility. Now you've noticed I've got 3 raptures here. That doesn't mean I think there's 3 raptures, even though there may be. There may be a barley harvest, a wheat harvest, and a grape harvest, for all I know. It's possible. But here's the way I see it. I can't tell you right now whether the rapture is here, 7 years, here, at around the time right before the abomination of desolation happens, right before the tribulation starts, or whether it's right down here before things really get interesting, what I'm calling the day of the Lord. It could occur any of one of those 3 times. So maybe you've got it all figured out and you've already laid it out, but I haven't. So I've got a plan here. The one thing I can say is all of these 3 treaties, all these 3 times, I call pre-wrath, right? Because Jesus Christ took our judgment. And therefore, we don't expect God's going to pour His wrath directly on us. We were not destined for wrath, He says. Amen. But we don't know which is God's wrath in here. Is birth pains God's wrath? Is the devil coming down and giving us tribulation? Is that God's wrath? Well, we'll talk more about that. Because the term wrath often uses the term pour. He pours His wrath out. And we can look to see, that can help us see what gets poured out and the timing of it. But I am not, at this point, a believer in the 7-year time frame. That's just me. Now, there are a lot of people that are, and we'll talk more about that. But if you are, when this treaty is signed, you're out of here. Or possibly before that treaty is signed, you're out of here, right? So if this treaty with Israel is going to happen, you better have your bags packed. Because that's it. That's the way I read it. It could be that maybe we're going to have to go through a few things, in which case you better be ready for that. Red letters mention some things about that. So, but without going into that today, because we don't have the time, I'm going to go on. So how do we know that it's the Daniel peace treaty? Well, here's what I'm proposing. We know it's a 7-year treaty agreement. From Amos 9, 14 and 15, I'm not going to go into the scriptures, but you can certainly look them up. Israel has the right to exist as a Jewish state. Right now, that's in the negotiation table. Because you realize that Palestinians don't believe that Israel should exist as a Jewish state. But it can be negotiated. The West Bank, including Judea, will become part of the new Palestinian state. Joel 3, 1 and 2. The Jewish settlers will be allowed to stay in allocated areas within Judea. Matthew 24, 16 and 18. what that says is that when you see the abomination of desolation, those that are in Judea flee. Well, Judea is the West Bank. The Temple Mount will be shared so that Israel can build their temple. Revelation 14:1 and 2. Sacrifices will be allowed in Jerusalem. We read that in Daniel 9. And Jerusalem, at least in part, will be the capital of Israel, according to Zechariah 14:2. So if a treaty comes with Israel that meets these criteria, there's a really good chance that that's it. And you realize this is something that's been negotiated. So let's look on. Will the peace treaty start in 2015? It's a good question. Well, first of all, I want you to look also here. It says, for your people and your holy city. It mentions Jerusalem. It talks about the city here. So this whole thing isn't just about Israel. It's also about a particular city called Jerusalem. That's the center of all of this. So the timing is based upon the city of Jerusalem. Now the Jews must have the city of Jerusalem. Now they didn't get that in 48. When did they get it? 67. So maybe that's our time. So we've got to look at these things and understand this prophecy focuses on your holy city, Jerusalem. Zechariah talks about, behold, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the people. Now, could you say that's happening now? Big time. And it will come about in that day, I'll make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all people, and all who will lift it will be severely injured. Can you see that happening right now? Do you realize I'm older? Meaning that back in the old days, we thought communism was going to be the problem. The whole focus was on the Cold War between Russia and the United States and the free world and the West and all this stuff. But is that where it is now? No. Have you noticed what's been going on? It's amazing how the whole world is fighting over 1 square mile of dirt that has no strategic value, that has no oil reserves. It doesn't have anything. And yet the whole world is reeling over this thing. Now, how on earth could that possibly have happened? It tells you something, that the Lord is doing this. Which is another thing. What if this is the perfect plan? What if all this that's happening is God doing it? You know, what if you look at ISIS and then you go back and read about the Assyrians and you say, boy, this certainly sounds familiar. Where did the Assyrians come from? And you begin to realize that God may have a plan here. And we may find ourselves fighting against the plan of God if we're not cautious. Because Peter tried to do that, right? No, Lord. No one's going to crucify you. I'm going to stop that. And he ended up fighting against the plan of God. So it's important to know what God's doing. Because you're not going to change what's written. And you don't want to. Because what if it's the perfect plan for His return? So let's look at a few articles here. The Israeli-Palestinian solution. Tony Blair holds out hope for our two-state solution. This is in 2009. Tony Blair is the spokesman for what's called the Madrid Quartet, which was founded by the Madrid Accord back in 1991 when the UN decided they're going to get involved in Mideast peace, so they created a negotiation team. We're going to be talking a whole lot about that team. It consists of the United Nations, the United States, the European Union, and Russia, and a spokesman. The spokesman happens to be Tony Blair. So they're saying, okay, we're going to come up with this two-state solution, which you'll find is very important because we actually sort of saw that in the treaty. This is some of the things the Bible's talking about. So it says there's no workable alternatives other than a two-state solution to the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in 2009. So this whole team is going to negotiate all that, right? So were they able to do that in 2009? Are we still here? Okay. This is what it sort of looks like. This is Israel, and here's the West Bank, this thing right here, which, if you look at it, it's pretty much, this is Judea, and this is Samaria or Israel. And it looks a whole lot like that. And of course over here is Gaza, which we know how well it worked when they made Gaza an independent state, sort of, didn't how that worked out. So this is what they're going to get, the high ground. And that's what they're fighting over, the 1967. And we'll be talking about why 1967 is an important date. It is very important relative to this. And you'll look prophetically. It's going to be fascinating when you find out how this connects. So this is what they're talking about. But Security Council reports Palestinian statehood bid stalled. Well, what happened was, apparently, by 2011, they still hadn't negotiated anything. So the Palestinians say, well, we're going to go, and we're going to go to the United Nations, and we're going to claim that we're a state, and we're going to get them to agree with us and give us statehood. And if we're statehood, then Israel has to be declared an occupying army, and the UN troops are going to literally move them out because we're now a state. So they took it to the UN. Well, it stalled because the Security Council has to recommend it to the General Council to get full statehood. And the United States is in that Security Council. And all it takes is one veto by the original 5 members. The other 4 aren't going to do it. So we're the ones who have. So we kept it. So it didn't happen then. So, back to it. UN approves the Palestinian Observer state bid. Well, it turns out they went back and did some negotiation. But what happened was, they decided back in 2012 now, to go back and say, well, we're going to be voted on by the General Assembly. We don't get full statehood, but we get some things called a non-member observer state, but we get recognized as a state in the UN. You see, they're doing an end run with the treaty. But it doesn't, you understand, this treaty could be mandated by the UN. It doesn't have to be negotiated. Because if we read back, it says that this person that's like the Antichrist, it says will basically confirm the treaty. They're going to be involved in that treaty. But it could be mandated. But one way or another, we vetoed it. Stopped it. And so this happened, but they're now a non-member state. So they couldn't get full statehood. But it was interesting, 138 nations were in favor, 9 against, and 41 abstained. And if you read the 9, you'll find out like 4 of these are like the American Samoa Islands and things like this. I mean, you know, where are all your friends? Germany, by the way, abstained. That's how, you see how everything's against Israel and in favor of the Palestinians moving into this thing. So can you see the pressure building toward this thing? I don't see how it hasn't come about yet, except God.
Amen.
So the Washington Post says the U.S. works on an outline for an Israeli-Palestinian peace deal ahead of the April deadline. Well, we said, hey, look, here's our deal. We're going to start this negotiation again. We're going to bring up the negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. John Kerry is going to do it. And we've got 9 months, and we're asking them to hold off going back to the UN, but to go ahead and let us do this negotiation. That ended in April 30th of 2014. It looked like all of this was going to happen by then. If it did, that starts the clock, guys. Best I can tell. But you know what? Somehow it didn't happen. With all the pressure there was, and believe me, there was lots of pressure on Israel. To give lots of pressure on all sides. The whole world is involved in this thing now. The whole world is pressuring in on this one thing. And yet they can't make it happen. And there's only one reason that I know of. So right now, they're talking about the April deadline. This is in December of 2013. And this is the end of when they think they could do this negotiation. But after that, the Palestinians say, no, we're going to go do it ourselves if we can't reach a negotiation. See, they're supposed to hold off plans of seeking the further recognition of the Palestinian government through the UN, a path that could confer de facto statehood without the input of Israel. So they're trying to avoid this and do a negotiation. It fell apart. It didn't happen, and yet everything's still there. It amazed me. I mean, I was thinking, this could be it. It wasn't. You realize the UN isn't the one who determines the times, right? I mean, we know that, right? All these things are happening, but who is it that's going to determine when this thing happens? Only God. The Palestinians, give us Jerusalem or there's no peace. Mahmoud Abbas says there's no peace deal without it, that Israel, that didn't explicitly include the Palestinian sovereignty over East Jerusalem.
Wow.
Sound familiar? Jerusalem, my holy city. Now, why do these people want Jerusalem? I mean, my God, there's so much, all the land is out there. And they're fighting over this one little area. Only God could have brought that about. So this whole thing is centered around the holy city. Who would have guessed that? 100 years ago, nobody, because it was just dirt and no one cared about it. But all of a sudden, that tells you something. That tells you the power of God. See, we don't understand that God can take events, and we can see these events, and they precipitate things. And if we see the events and we understand it, then we may know some things. For instance, Caesar Augustus declared there'd be a tax, right? Well, if he declared there's going to be a tax, what did that cause to happen? Mary and Joseph had to do what? Go to the Bethlehem, right, to register. Well, let's look at that event. If he wouldn't have done that, then would they have gone there? You see, these events, God moved the whole world around the event where Caesar Augustus is declaring this thing. And no one thought, oh, Christ is coming, because Caesar Augustus declared that everybody's got to go to their hometown, and therefore, someone from the city of David is going to go back to Jerusalem and have a baby during that time. But yet it was a precipitating event. That'd have been a hard one to guess. I don't think I would have got that one. But here, we can see that Jerusalem, unless it's mentioned clearly and marked in big fonts, that's the capital of the state of Palestine, there will be no peace with Israel. This is what's coming. From the Jerusalem Post, Abbas rejects extending the peace talks. So he says, no, if we can't do it, we're not agree even one-day extension. So it looked like things were going to really get, because we were trying to extend it and keep things going. It's nope, not going to happen. So I'm thinking, April, that sounds about right. They're going to sign this deal and click, the clock starts. They didn't do it. Israel suspends peace talks with the Palestinians because right before April, they decided to join Hamas and form a Palestinian government. The PLO was doing the negotiations. That was a group independent from the terrorist organization Hamas. They said, no, man, we're going to join with Hamas. So now, the peace talks in April are toast. So what happened after that? Well, it turns out that they were busy during that time building all these tunnels underneath with all the concrete, making tunnels from Gaza into Israel. And these tunnels were built with places inside of them, rooms where they were going to keep people that they basically would kidnap. So they had these places where they were going to go out and kidnap Israelis and then bring them into these tunnels. They were planning on attacking. The attack was to come during the Holy Weeks, they found out, in the fall of 2014. They didn't happen because, of all things, they started firing rockets. About 3,700 rockets they fired into Israel. And what happened? Well, that caused Israel to look around, and all of a sudden they found these tunnels. There were several things that did. There was also a killing of a couple people that caused it. So all these things were happening, and all of a sudden now they found these tunnels and were able to go in and blow up these tunnels and literally start a war where 2,200 people died with the 50-day war. That could have done it. The world has got to say, enough is enough, right? We're tired of this. We're going to stop this thing. And there are ways they could do this, and I'll talk about how this can happen. How the UN can literally go in and establish things and say, this is the treaty. You sign it or you no longer exist. You think by now the world would do that. But it's not in the world's hands, is it? The Arab states then endorsed a new Palestinian move at the UN. This is from January 15th. The Arab foreign ministers on Thursday endorsed a Palestinian plan to resubmit a draft to the UN Security Council calling for the withdrawal from occupied territories by late 2017. The peace deal must take place within 12 months. Let's see, 12 months from January? Yeah. Can you see the pressure that this thing needs to happen? Eventually, you think people are going to get fed up and the world is going to say, enough's enough. This is, you know how big Israel is. You guys, some of you have been there, right? I know you guys have been there. About the size of what, Delaware, I think it is? I mean, it's a little bitty place. You know, people are fighting all over this thing. It's totally amazing this thing's still around. Washington Post said the Palestinian move at the International Criminal Court signals a volatile new stage. So not only did they say, no, we're going to try to declare and make this thing happen this year, but we now have decided to join the criminal court and filed into there and are now filing against Israel for war crimes during the war. So that means that you could arrest Netanyahu on down for war crimes, for what's going on in Israel. So can you see how the UN has been drawn into this? The world government has been drawn into this. So here's just something that's just a summary of these things. About 2011, they sought full membership. This is an interesting one. October 2011, applied and won full membership to UNESCO. Now, we're going to talk about why that is really, really important. But not now. We don't have time. And then November 12, sought and won this non-member state, 2014, withdrawal from Israel's borders or else by the end of the year. And now we filed with the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The ICC has agreed and is starting their investigation of Israel for alleged war crimes committed during the Gaza conflict. That's happening now, this month. So can you see the pressure? Oh, luckily though, we have what's called a Mideast Quartet. You remember Tony Blair before? He doesn't look quite as good as he did then, but he is still the negotiation body of the UN. Him, along with, as a speaker, with the United Nations, United States, United Nations, European Union, and Russia. And they're saying, whoa, we've got to revive the peace process. He said this on the 15th, and the quartet meeting is on the 26th. So you got things to watch for and to pray for. You can see all this is happening right now. It says, after the Palestinian failed to win the UN Security Council approval for ending the Israeli occupation, they call it. So this is happening right now. Rivlin, the new president in Israel, says, he's saying renew peace talks instead of pursuing these efforts in the International Criminal Court. He said it on January 18th. There's no other way than direct negotiations. So they've got an appeal to start the peace talks again. And Netanyahu, by the way, Prime Minister, this is today, I guess, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address a joint session of U.S. Congress in early March, which happens to be 2 weeks before the elections in Israel. So the question is Netanyahu even going to be the Prime Minister? I can tell you there's people in the government that don't want him to be there because they see how hard he's been in these negotiations. They think, well, if Netanyahu goes away, maybe we can find some people that are, more amenable to that. So all this is happening right now. This is real time. So he's going to be here, Netanyahu. So you got things to pray for, you got things to watch for. This is all happening. So I'm just trying to show you that if this peace process finally happens, negotiated or demanded or whatever else, as best I can tell, that starts the clock. So for me, you are here. And I put together a little timeline showing from Rosh Hashanah, September 14th, to Rosh Hashanah 2022. Because I believe there's a good chance the Lord will return on Rosh Hashanah. And 7 years before that would be Rosh Hashanah. So that means sometime in this period, anytime, they could do that negotiation. And if so, if they do it before September 14th, there's a good chance these things, because things happen on Jewish holidays, right? And of course, Passover is around the midpoint. Passover of 2019 would be the midpoint, would be a really good time for either that or Purim, which happens around the same time. Might be a really good time for the Antichrist to go into the temple, the newly built temple. Because, once they get an agreement that you can share the Temple Mount, then they are already ready. Israel's ready to build the temple, right? They got all their priests and everything ready to go. This thing is just waiting for one thing to happen. You know who the one thing is? God. But everything is in place, guys. And if you looked at it, you wouldn't believe that we've gone this far. How on earth is Israel still sitting over there? How on earth with, 1.7 billion Muslims around them, and the world pretty much all against them, judging by the votes that we've seen, yet they're still there. And now we have Iran trying to build nuclear weapons to destroy them with one bomb. So is Iran going to destroy Israel? Anyone guess?
No.
Why? That's right, it's prophesied, it's written. That's right. So we're watching history. So we're going to go into some details about this, about understanding some of the fascinating things, that how all these pieces are coming together. Because I want you to watch this thing. You've got a front row seat, and it's not a time to blink. And you need to be ready. And there's people who don't know what's going on. They think everything is going on just fine. But I'm telling you, there's a whole list of people that says that it's going to be 7 years before the return of Christ is the rapture. So there's a whole lot of powerful people that say, when this treaty's signed, we're out of here. So, just something to consider.